When it comes to upcoming fighting games, none are more hotly anticipated than that of Tekken 8. Since the franchise stormed onto the scene in the PS1 era, the Tekken brand has remained one of the most relevant and well-known series of fighters that has ever been created. During the 90s, an awesome trilogy of games rocked the Sony PlayStation and changed the gaming landscape forever. But at one point in time, the very first Tekken game was planned to be something very different. In fact, it wasn't even meant to be a fighting game at all. So with all of that said, join me today to listen to this strange gaming tale as we visit the era before Tekken was actually Tekken. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the story of Rave War, the Lost Tekken 0. Yeah. Every game goes through a number of permutations before it hits store shelves. The iconic Final Fight, for example, infamously began its life as a direct sequel to Capcom's earlier one-on-one brawler, Street Fighter, and was shown off to arcade vendors as Street Fighter 89. Building on early designs of classic games, recently on this channel we have discussed the fact that Battle Circuit was originally intended to be a foot-based racing title, and not the hidden gem belt action brawler it ended up. Change is common and embraced in video game development, and even going as far back as Nintendo's Donkey Kong, it was originally a title intended to feature the cast of Popeye, instead of everyone's favourite blue and red wearing Ron Jeremy lookalike. The truth is, gaming history is littered with could-have-beens, and Namco are by no means immune to such changes. History now tells us that when the fighting game market was saturated in the early 1990s, the company savvily decided to develop a 3D fighter after the success of rival Sega's Virtua Fighter. Complete with excited partner for the venture Sony, they were looking for a title to take advantage of their upcoming platform, the Nintendo PlayStation. Oh wait, I mean the Sony PlayStation, that was another could have been. The multiverse is truly everywhere nowadays, isn't it? The development of the game that would eventually become Tekken is an odd journey. Originally, the project began as an internal Namco experiment, with animating 3D character models with texture mapping, potentially spinning out of earlier success in this medium with Ridge Racer, the 1993 racing hit. An interview by Edge magazine with Katsuhiro Harada in 2013, who would go on to be a general manager of Bandai Namco Entertainment, would give his thoughts on the original title and his evolution with the brand from marketing and promoting games for Namco. He states, "They gave me a position on the first Tekken. My job was to balance the game, work on timing and frame data, adjusting that to get the most out of the game. Tekken wasn't designed as a fighting game initially. They more wanted to develop a test case for using 3D models. This was a vehicle to try out animation. They really just wanted to prove that they could create a 3D character that would respond to your inputs. It was quite basic in some ways. Now, if you go back and play that early game, it's nothing like the game it has evolved into today. It was actually a little bit broken. There were certain moves that couldn't be blocked, and in truth, it wasn't very well balanced at all. We weren't really striving to make the game different on a fundamental level to Virtua Fighter. Our entire focus was on pushing the technological boundaries. For example, Ridge Racer was one of the first times a texture had been added to a polygon model. Tekken was an attempt to take that principle and apply it to 3D characters. We were also keen to see if we could create a fighting game that ran at 60 frames per second. Virtua Fighter only ran at half that speed. As you can see, the focus was on technology rather than gameplay design throughout. In fact, the game's director and lead designer, Seiichi Ishii, had previously worked as a motion designer at Sega on Virtua Fighter. Ishii was completely focused on the 3D and the models and the frame rate. That changed later, but in those early days it was where our focus lay. Development of the title would follow another infamous parallel, when the creator of the original Street Fighter, Takashi Nishiyama, would leave Capcom soon after the release to join SNK, in which he would leave the development of a title that would rival his original franchise, Fatal Fury. Namco likewise had recently acquired some developers from Sega, leading to experience with 3D based fighting. Coupled with Namco meeting with Sony Computer Entertainment's Ken Kutaragi in 1993 to discuss the design of the PlayStation hardware, Namco would then develop the Namco System 11 board based on those specs, with Virtua Fighter's designer Seiichi Ishii aiming for the title to be similar to his previous work, but with detailed textures and impressive 60 frames per second visuals. Counterintuitively, the title was originally intended for the Namco System 22, which is actually weaker than the System 11. System 22 was the hardware that the Ridge Racer Ace Driver, Time Crisis, and the recycled Rave name of Rave Racer would eventually be released on. The System 11 hardware was promoted in a June 1995 issue of Edge, with the publication stating Namco took a significant risk in basing its Tekken coin-op on raw PlayStation hardware, considering that it would be competing directly with Sega's Model 2 powered Virtua Fighter 2. For once, a home system can boast an identical conversion of a cutting-edge coin-op. Namco's research section managing director, Shigechi Nakamura, explains, when Sony came along, we decided to go for a low-cost system. In short, we've left the big arcade stores to Sega and Virtua Fighter 2, and Tekken has been sold to smaller arcade centres. Namco has a further 4 titles planned for System 11, all of which are likely to make the jump to the PlayStation. Before the System 11 hardware would be replaced with the System 12 board, Tekken, Tekken 2, Soul Edge and a number of other titles would be made available on the hardware, with System 12 carrying the legacy of those titles further. With Tekken 3, Soul Calibur, Tekken Tag Tournament and even the iconic Mr. Driller being released on the hardware. An old Electronic Gaming Monthly, issue 65, would preview Rave Wars, describing the development as follows. Namco is working hard on a brand new entry in the realm of fighting games. Rave Wars, as our AMOA, Amusement and Musical Operators Association Expo coverage stated, fighting style is like that of Virtua Fighter 2. However, I found Rave War quite a bit more fun to play. The gameplay mechanics, not to mention the sheer graphics and background intensity, are astounding. The characters have long and very interesting backgrounds. For example, the Lion character used to be a drug-dealing scumbag, until a traumatic event in his life woke him up. He has since become a priest and is now fighting to raise money for his parish. Rave War uses some of the same amazing technology used in their popular Ridge Racer series. When you first start playing the game, you immediately realise just how much work was put into the gameplay. Each character now has a number of moves to choose from, and as they are executed, the screen rotates for the best view. Look for it in the first quarter of '95. Accompanying this preview are 4 images, alongside praise about the grappling in the title, with the writer pointing out that almost everyone has a suplex, and it's one of the best looking throws in the game, but the body slam is pretty impressive as well. Early versions of stages like the Acropolis and Windermere are shown as battlefields for this demo. The Lion character they mentioned is clearly King, based on the real-life pro wrestler Satoru Sayama, who went frequently by Tiger Mask, which has become the star of a Japanese multimedia franchise, and Frei Tormenta, a Mexican Catholic priest that used his profile to support an orphanage. His story was comically adapted in the Jack Black picture Nacho Libre, which raises the question, when's the legend of the British ring going to be represented? Namco, my agents are anxiously awaiting the call. Another article would show a picture of the character select screen, featuring Kazuya against, well, question? No, not the DC conspiracy theorist superhero, but either a random character select or a character whose profile hasn't been finished. The profiles of Jack, Kazuya, King, Law and Paul are all obvious, but a character that may be Heihachi or Ganryu is in the selection, or maybe an early version of Yoshimitsu. It's of note that both Michelle and Nina are absent from this character select screen. Unseen64 would show off many early designs of the cast as found in an art book released in Japan, Tekken Chronicle. Poring over the page shows a number of unique designs, including many dominatrix inspired looks, or those that culled from Joshi Pro Wrestling. A woman boxer was highlighted in 2 of the designs, which could potentially be an early design for Nina, or a scrapped character altogether. Hell, in the top right, it features a wrestler not in a tiger mask, but in a mask that looks like another Japanese superhero, Maggie Yellow of the Sentai franchise. While the article mentions that the game that would eventually become Tekken would be available in the first quarter of 1995, it actually hit Japanese arcades in September 1994, and worldwide that December. The title, with close collaboration with Sony, would then release on the PlayStation in March 1995 in Japan and November internationally. This home port would allow players to unlock a number of characters unplayable in the arcade version, alongside adding Devil Kazuya, at this point only known as Devil. While the title would obviously be shifted from Rave War to Tekken, martial law has 2 attacks that reference the original title, the Rave War combo and Quick Rave War. This title, which hasn't been explored fully, may simply be a legacy aspect of the Ridge Racer Born development, as a vehicle in the arcade release features the test Rave War. When Tekken would finally reach its promotional stages, a flyer would also reference the original title, alongside referencing other fighting games. It states the following: "Many perished during the mortal Street Fighters that were only a preview of the challenges that were to come. Only 8 remain, those with a true killer instinct, all ready to die to gain the title of Tekken, Lord of the Rave War." That's a lot of references. Tekken would distinguish itself from Virtua Fighter beyond the graphical prowess of the hardware. Harada, in an interview with Game Developer, would highlight how the animation of the characters would be important. He outlines that before Tekken, at the time, Namco had been conducting a lot of research and development into polygon-based graphics, and the consensus we had was that true-to-life animation was going to become a huge aspect of game graphics going into the future. That turned out to be very true, of course. The limb-based control scheme sort of grew from that, but the scheme also felt really good for a fighter. You could execute those 1-2 punch combos really quickly and intuitively. Certainly, we were constantly aiming to improve ourselves, trying to avoid doing things that were already done before. One thing with Virtua Fighter was that the action your character took depended on which side he was facing. His moves were flipped depending on whether he was facing left or right. Including all of the animation data to make that function is a ton of work, and required what at the time was a lot of data. The control system for the first Tekken was an attempt to avoid that requirement and just execute the same moves no matter which side the fighter's facing. That in turn freed up more storage space for things like extra characters and moves. As we know, in 2024, Rave War would begin a significant legacy in the fighting game realm. Tekken 8 will be released in coming months, and the cast of characters have found themselves in battles with the Street Fighter cast and even inspired a full Pokemon title. This all raises a lot of questions. For example, would Rave War have had the same impact that the Iron Fist inspired title had on the world? And would Sony have survived those early days without such a unique assistance from Namco? One thing is for sure, Tekken is awesome. So subscribe, then check out my video on the lost Tekken Cross Street Fighter game right now. Cheerio.